Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today I am joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's been a while since Brent has been on the podcast. He's been out playing around.
Yeah, lots of fun, Brian. Lots of fun.
But today we wanted to get back together and get some people out of the Amazon. You and I did this book reading a while back on Theodore Roosevelt's Darkest Journey, The River of Doubt. It's a book written by Candace Millard, and I think we got like 8 or 9 some parts of this book.
We don't do numbers very well.
Yeah,
it's a rough count.
Anyway, we got a lot of people interested in the book, and hopefully, a lot of people actually went and got the book and read it. You know, like the old-fashioned way. Or Audible listened, whatever. But we had a lot of people came up to me at the Western Hunt Expo and said...
With a lot of abandonment issues?
Yeah, and they were like, dude, you can't just leave us hanging in the middle of your book reading, you know, of this story. So, Brent and I we're doing a little reunion here. Brent and I are going to get back into some of this stuff that we find interesting and do some podcasts around this book and others on books we basically enjoy. So today is we're going to resume where we left off.
Do you remember where that is, Brian?
It took me a while to find out. I read this book a number of times, but yes.
Yeah, if you go through this, it's all marked up with like several little
sticky notes that are written in here and so forth. But yeah.
But no actual bookmark.
Not really. I mean, I have some notes. And so I went through and found out, just to get you up to speed, basically, the jungle is a deadly place. There's lots of freaky animals. There was that thing that swims up a man's urethra.
Fish.
Yeah.
The PP fish, as Mom calls it.
And there's the tent bat and the sloth and lots of ants, and it's a scary...
Bugs.
The Amazon's a dark, difficult place to survive, and they are now floating down the river. They have to keep portaging around waterfalls and cauldrons and whirlpools.
And they're basically in giant tree trunk rafts.
Yeah, dugouts, just trees that have been chopped out. And this was a sort of a not a great expedition to begin with. If you know, they had not really prepared for this the way that they should, and they're basically rafting down a river that is never been charted or explored by anyone, really. Even the native folks that they run into, or the signs of the native people down there, they're dangerous. They've probably never seen any Western people, no Caucasian folks, and so here they are in a very treacherous place, kind of half-cocked, going through the jungle. They had brought all these provisions, which they ditched along the way. They ditched their canoes, their lightweight canvas ones. Now they're running these log dugouts. Like, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And that sets the stage for them now, sort of, you know, in the Brazilian highlands, in the Andes Mountains. And here they are, like, trying to get through. And at this point, the only way to survive is to go through. Like, they can't go back. It's just forward or you die in the jungle. So that's where we're starting off with the book. Before we get into that, I want to ask you guys, if you like the show and you like what we're producing, use the code GRITTY over at Mountain Ops. They have this new, I just gave it to Brent today.
I'm excited to go test this out.
This is the new high stimulant pre-workout, Brent, called Yeti Mode. It's a lot of niacin. It's a lot of beta-alanine, a lot of caffeine.
Yeah. I've been taking Yeti for years, and I'm a little, like, not a little fearful maybe of trying to take this.
This is next level.
Intimidated?
I got to say, I have been enjoying it, actually. Before I go to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing CrossFit and jiu-jitsu a couple days a week. And I take this. Or if I just have a great interview and I want to stay, like, on.
Oh, dude, you'd be itching. I couldn't do it. I take Ignite when I want to just have like a regular workout.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to lift really heavy, I'll take Yeti.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to use Yeti mode for yet. I'll test around and I'll let you guys know.
You do it for the pump, Brent. That's what it's for. So there's that. And then, folks, use the code GRITTY at Dark Energy. I don't have one of those battery packs with me, but every backpack hunter needs a battery pack to charge all your devices. We've been using the Dark Energy chargers since like 2015. Still have some of the originals. I think I have all my originals. If I haven't lost it, none of them have broke. They keep working and they're performing great, and they're older than dirt.
We've ran all the podcast equipment off those things before in the past
for years.
Just a bunch of Yetis.
Yep. So the Dark Energy battery pack, use the code GRITTY over there. Get yourself a battery bank. And then we don't have a affiliate code or anything with this company, but Anchor makes this PowerPort solar charger.
I haven't seen this.
You want this, Brent. Like, it's unreal. It has 3 panels. It's 14 ounces. You combine this with the Dark Energy battery pack, and pretty much you have no limit of electricity and power. It's been like, it's amazing.
Would you call it a game changer?
I was trying to avoid that, but yes, it's a game changer. So, no, that's been great. We ran it for about a year. Lampers used it extensively last year to see, and it's going to be solar panels from now on. In the past, they were just too heavy and they didn't perform well. And so you were better off just bringing 4 or 5 battery packs and just, carrying that extra weight, whether you used it or didn't. Now you could do 1 battery pack in this 14-ounce solar panel, and basically you don't ever have to worry about your Garmin InReach running out of power or your maps on your phone dying.
That's
cool.
Have
to worry about.
Batteries are heavy.
And then this headlamp is the new Peaks Duo, Backcountry Duo Headlamp. This is rechargeable. And
why do they call it a duo, Brian?
It's got a red light and a white light, but it's LEDs, and they are powerful, and the battery is intense. You'll see some headlamps that look similar, but they're not. This has everything on the guts of this is totally different, and really we were able to customize and say we want this, and we want it to burn this much power through the bulbs. We want the bulbs to go this bright and have all these settings. It has memory settings. It locks, and then
so it's a smart headlamp.
It's got a charging port. Big old. You can replace the battery if you wanted to. It's a big battery, heavy duty, lots of power. A lot of the knockoff types don't. They have like a battery that's a third or a quarter this powerful, and doesn't change the weight at all. And then you've got your charging port here, but
I like how they have that charging port under there. That's cool.
Yeah. We've tried to ruin it, bust it, and it runs for hours. I've taken this on a 10-day trip and never had to charge it even one time. So, like I said, it's the Peaks Backcountry Duo Headlamp. I love this thing. It's worth every penny. Use the code GRITTY over there. And if you don't have trekking poles or gaiters, check out Peaks. I think they're among the best in the industry. Plus, it supports a hunting brand. All right, so Brent, let's get into this show here. And let's get into our book. It's been a while. I'm just gonna dive right in, okay?
Yeah, let's go.
For every plant and creature that surrounded Roosevelt and his men as they toiled to build their first Portage road, the qualifications for survival in the rainforest were essentially the same. The ability to find food, the ability to find their way through the labyrinth of nature around them, and the ability to protect themselves and their offspring from predators. In every part of the jungle, those requirements had produced miracles of adaptation and efficiency. In their hunt for food, the birds overhead enjoyed eyesight roughly 8 times as acute as the best human vision. Some of the hawk moths that fluttered across the campsite at night could unfurl 6-inch long tongues to drink from the deep-throated flowers that sustained them.
Hummingbird moths.
The leaf-cutting ants that paraded by in long lines carried proportionally huge bits of foliage, could not eat that leaf matter outright, but painstakingly transported it back home to cultivate the underground fungus on which their colony survived.
That's trippy. Farming ants?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything is so specialized and unique and has evolved to be part of something else, you know? It's like they found ways to make this worse. So even though they can't eat that leaf, they can take that leaf and grow fungus from it down in their holes and then eat that.
That's crazy.
Although the men of the expedition couldn't discern them, the apparent chaos around them was actually organized into sophisticated paths that led throughout the jungle. Pink-faced capuchin monkeys.
Or capuchin.
Capuchin? I can't remember. There's a way to say that. Maybe I'm hitting it.
Pink-faced monkeys.
Yeah, they swung along. They're the little annoying ones. Swung along rapidly on carefully defined arboreal pathways at heights where the smallest miscalculation can mean a fatal fall. Millions of bats following intricate sounds shaped by the strange fleshy protrusions or nose leaves on their faces swooped confidently through the crowded, pitch-black forest on the basis of sound alone, alighting blindly but precisely on their nectar-filled blossoms, fruit or insect prey, and even taking delicate sips of water from the river in mid-flight.
Yeah, don't get too close to the river. Of course, you're going to drive by a drink.
Some arrow fish is going to eat you. Snakes, spiders, millipedes, mice, and lizards, to say nothing of their amazing ant neighbors, followed chemical pathways of taste and smell across the thin forest floor, ranging far each night before returning with flawless navigation to their carefully hidden sanctuaries. At every step, any resources that did not go to finding sustenance were devoted to securing protection from predators. Everything in the rainforest, even the trees, had adapted to protect itself and its progeny from predation. The rubber tree, which had made the Amazon basin a center of frenzied commercial attention, produced its sticky resin, not for the purpose of building automobile tires, but to choke its insect predators. The army ants that flooded out of the trees and plants that the expedition disturbed were genetically programmed to give their own lives to save the 1 to 300,000 offspring carried by their one queen.
So we don't have a computer today because some genius did a hit and run on the power pole.
Yeah, somebody outside this morning, looked like two teenage boys in a giant farm pickup in 2 feet of snow. Well, it wasn't 2 feet, but it was deep snow. Mm-hmm. Just came sailing down the road as if they were on like a hot, sunny day on dry pavement. And when they came to the corner here, it just looks like they just kept on going. And they took out the power pole, the transformers, the poles. I mean, just, they're lucky they didn't get electrocuted and die. But yeah, we have no electricity.
No internet. And
no nothing.
You live out in BFE, so there's not even cell service out here.
We're out here, yeah. We're out here in the middle of nowhere where I love it, where people aren't and the mountains are.
I was going to say, I do remember looking up rubber trees. Do you know what color it is when it comes out? The sap?
I'm going to guess. I'm going to just throw a guess out there. It's gray.
It literally looks like half and half pouring out of trees.
Milk?
Yeah.
Oh, white.
Yeah. I just would have assumed rubber.
I knew that.
I would have assumed either pinkish because of bubblegum or some kind of black because of tires. White was not on the top of my list.
You know, actually, when you look at old tires and stuff, or old-timey stuff, it is white, now that I think about it. I would think pink because of rubber erasers on the end of pencils.
I was thinking of the ice cream.
Yeah, no, that didn't cross my mind, really.
Nope, that's a me and dad thing. Bubblegum ice cream.
Yeah, so let's see. Within blah, 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 blah. So you can't look this stuff up exactly today. Brent can't cruise the internet while I'm reading. Okay, so this is creepy. They were programmed to give their own lives to save the 1 to 300,000 offspring. 300,000 offspring carried by the one queen. The
this
army
is going to bug me now. So does the queen come pre-equipped with all those, or does she make eggs?
I don't
know, like a mammal is they come out with a set amount of eggs. That's it.
300,000 offspring is, and I guess, I don't want to be around 100 ants, let alone 300,000.
I don't want to be around 8 ant.
Army ants are just wicked. Like, have you seen those documentaries where they just like march in a line and they just consume everything in their path and kill it? Like, and they give up their own lives.
Bro, I lived in Texas for a minute, and I'll tell you what, those ants were mean. Yeah. Mean. It was a hot day. I was walking, took a nice little sit down, just ate my ass off. Yeah. Within like 5 minutes.
It can be good. Within such an intricate world of resourcefulness, skill, and ruthless self-interest, refined over hundreds of millions of years, Roosevelt and his men were, for all their own experience and knowledge, vulnerable outsiders.
They basically landed on Mars, bro.
Most of the men were veteran outdoorsmen, and many of them considered themselves masters of nature.
Joke's on you.
They were stealthy hunters, crack shots, and experienced survivalists, and given the right tools, they believed that they would never find themselves in a situation in the wild that they could not control.
They're running out of food, right? Like they basically are hunting to survive.
They thought they could just live off the land because all the places they've ever been, they could do that. But what was odd about the jungle is even though it's teeming with life, they didn't see any life. So people often think that when they go to Alaska, I'm publishing those grizzly bear hunts right now, especially the further north that you get, I see fewer and fewer game, like vast tracts of land, especially in the tundra, and not one animal in it. And you tend to, you don't realize that till you go there. Same thing is true here. I think they're surrounded by animals actually, though, in the jungle. They just can't even see them or don't even know what's what. It's just silent and nothing gives itself away. It's all camouflage and all the death happens silently in dark corners. And
see what they're doing here. Remember those old Oregon Trail games? They're doing the pro strat. You just bring axle wheels and bullets, right. And then you just live off the land. You got down a buffalo or two every week, and you're good.
As they struggled to make their way along the shores of the River of Doubt, any basis for such confidence was quickly slipping away. Compared with the creatures of the Amazon, including the Indians whose territory they were invading, they were all from the lowliest camarada to the former president of the United States, clumsy, conspicuous prey. That sets the stage, okay? For those that haven't caught up or heard the whole journey up to this point, basically, they're in the jungle. They're kind of screwed.
Ill-prepared.
And under experience, they don't really know, and the jungle is the Amazon jungle is no bueno.
What would make me mad about this whole trip if I were them is the fact that we're supposed to be going down a river, yet you're making roads every couple miles.
Yeah, they keep having to portage around things, and we're going to get more into that. It's bad because they keep coming across, like every day they're behind, they're kind of starving, and so every day that they have to stop from floating the river and get out and portage their canoes down some waterfalls, carry them through the jungle, which these don't carry because they're logs.
And they're hundreds of pounds.
They have to cut all these logs that they use, that they set the boat on, and they roll, with block and tackle.
I've watched Vikings. I know how it works.
It's not good. Okay. Back to the book. The long, difficult portage around the first set of rapids, which Rondon, he's like the army colonel for Brazil that's leading this expedition. He's been on some gnarly expeditions. He's the
kind of guy who makes a suicide pact but ends up living every time.
Yeah, he is a one tough
psychopath.
No, just a tough, like, military leader. And ruthless too, like to a degree. Like his men need to do what they're told, or he, you will be shot for desertion or something like that.
Looking at him funny,
but he's a good man.
It's an honorable man with weird honor.
So anyway, he's been through this before. Like, didn't he? He went on an expedition. I don't remember the numbers now because it's been too long since we read this. But the gist is he went on an expedition with tons of men, and only a few of them made it out alive.
And I feel like that happened like 6 times.
Remember how that guy?
It wasn't like once.
That one dude, his tongue got bit off by the piranha.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? And then he almost died, bled to death because his tongue.
Yeah.
Because they catch these fish and they put them in their mouth to hold on to them while they were reaching for more fish. After they poison the water,
He deserved everything he got.
They poison the water with something to like kill the fish, so they all float.
It was
up.
like this herb that they just mushed up and threw in the water.
Yeah, I think Meat Eater had an episode on that where they were putting that into the water in the Amazon and catching these fish. So it wasn't dead though; it was just sort of stunned. So he put a piranha in his mouth, I guess, mouth to mouth. And then while he was, trying to catch more, it woke up and bit his tongue off.
Yeah, he made out with a piranha. I don't know what he think was going to happen.
Play stupid
Smack
games,
the thing on a
win
rock
stupid
first or
prizes.
something. Like,
yeah, no, that's a costly mistake.
yeah, that's how you weed the gene pool.
So he says, okay, the long, difficult portage around the first set of rapids. So they're carrying their boats around the rapids, which Rondon had named, what is that?
Naivete?
Yeah, it looks like it. Naivete Rapids, in honor of the Indians who... No. Oh, okay. That's the name of the Indian tribe.
Navate?
I forget how it's pronounced. I haven't heard it in a while. He believed that they lived at the foot of these rapids, and so he named it after them. Riding on the smooth current, they noticed that the forest on either side of them grew denser and denser, and therefore more picturesque. Rondon wrote as they pushed deeper and deeper into the Amazon. The rainforest that flanked the River of Doubt was the definition of primordial jungle. It was lush, vivid green, and absolutely pristine. At night, gathered close to their campfire after a simple dinner, the men unfailingly talked about the river's undecipherable course, wondering aloud where it would lead them and what the next day would hold. We held endless discussions and hazarded all kinds of guesses on both subjects. So they're wondering, what's going to happen here as they got past that first set of rapids. We did not know whether we had 100 or 800 kilometers to go, Roosevelt wrote. They really didn't. They had no idea where this river was going to go, how it was going to go. They just jumped on a river and were like, yeah, let's float this all the way to the ocean from the heart of the Amazon.
Or maybe there's a couple flat earthers among them, and that's really what this is about, Brian.
Whether the stream would be fairly smooth or whether we would encounter waterfalls or rapids or even some big marsh or lake, Roosevelt did not have long to wait for the answer to his second question. Around 3 o'clock the next afternoon, the men again felt the current quicken and heard the ominous roar of rapids ahead. They stopped, tied their canoes to some trees, and made their way down the bank by using a narrow trail blazed by a tapir, which is a critter that lives out there. It looks kind of like a...
They're like a hog mixed with an elephant almost. They have a trunk.
They're funny.
They're funky looking.
What they saw just a quarter mile downstream, 2 waterfalls carved out of red rock, followed by a series of treacherous rapids, left no doubt in anyone's mind that they would again have to haul their heavy dugouts from the water and drag them around the jungle. The expedition's second portage took 3 full days. The men were nervous not only about the time and rations that they were losing by carrying the equipment and hauling the canoes over the rough terrain, but about the damage that they were doing to their dugouts in the process. During the first portage, Roosevelt's canoe, battered by the crude corduroy road, had cracked. They had managed to patch it, but they did not know how long it would last or what yet another long portage would do to the other canoes. The more they take them out of the water.
Did they just patch it with rubber?
I don't know. The dugouts, heavy, clumsy, and sagging though they were as precious to the men as the provisions they carried. When they say sagging, they mean like half sunk underwater as they float. The men had no hope that this series of rapids might be the last that they would encounter. On the first day of the portage, the expedition got more bad news. Kermit had gone about 4 miles downstream that day. Kermit Roosevelt is Theodore's youngest son. I think he's 20 or something, 19. Kermit had gone about 4 miles down the stream that day to hunt with his dog, Trigueiro, and Antonio Peresi, one of Roosevelt's paddlers. As a hunt, the outing had been a success. Kermit returned with a jacu, a turkey-like bird, for Franca's pot. And Antonio brought back a big monkey. Roosevelt himself had even developed a taste for monkey meat, pronouncing his first mouthful very good eating. Now, they're starving, so I think that, whatever. It's probably good, though. I mean, I've eaten things that people think won't taste good, and they've been delicious, like coatimundi. Let's see. But as excited as the men had been to see Antonio, holding a monkey in his hands when he walked back into camp. The news that Kermit carried deflated their spirits. If they made it through this series of treacherous rapids, he reported, another one awaited them not far down river. The men were defeated before they had even finished their first day of muscle-wrenching, bone-jarring work portaging around the second series of rapids. Lyra and Kermit divided the camaradas into two divisions, while Lyra and his men cut and laid the corduroy road. Kermit's team began dragging the dugouts up from the river. Together, they then strained to pull the boats through the jungle and down the steep banks at the foot of the rapids. So they got those logs all laid out, and they're just rolling these logs along the river banks, trying to get them around all the nasty rapids. On March 10th, the men finally completed their 3-day, 750-yard portage and relaunched their boats.
Oh, my gosh. Only a mile later.
Only a mile later, however, they reached the rapids that Kermit had warned them about.
I would cry.
This time, the prospect of another overland struggle was too much for them to bear. On the theory that the risk to their canoes from another haul through the jungle was even greater than the threat of smashing them to matchsticks in the roiling river, they decided to plunge ahead and take their chances on the water. One group of camaradas was assigned to carry the provisions to the foot of the falls by means of hastily cut forest trails, while the rest of the men worked to get their empty dugouts through the rapids. The 3 individual canoes were then run straight through the boulder-strewn water by a couple of naked and intrepid paddlers who managed to bring them through undamaged. The smaller of the 2 balsas, however, did not make it.
Oh, no.
It was swamped, and before they could do anything to save it, it sank.
That means they have to make more canoes? Yuck.
And the balsas were the lighter of the canoes. I think
the
more
canvas
buoyant
ones?
As well. No,
or is that just the type of tree?
Just the type of tree, balsa wood.
Oh, durr.
It's like, pithy, or it's just light, like feather. Desperate not to lose the canoes, the camaradas tore into the river and wrenched them free from the rapids. In the process, one camarada was momentarily carried away by the rushing water.
Whoops.
He fought his way to the bank, but not before slashing his face open on the unforgiving rocks that lined the riverbed. Shaken by the near catastrophe, the men were not willing to risk the second larger balsa. They secured it to ropes and slowly lowered it down the river. No one worked harder than Kermit to get the expedition past these rapids and back into the river. He was at his best when he had a mission. Left to his own devices, he had a tendency to brood, even to fall into a quiet depression. But given a cause, he worked harder than anyone around him. He thrived on the challenge, and Roosevelt marveled at his son, who had grown a heavy beard and was dressed substantially like the camaradas themselves, as he worked tirelessly to defeat the rapids that stood between him and home. They often talk about men who are heroic in wars and men who thrive under pressure, that they sometimes come back to civilized world and they don't fit in very well, and they often struggle. Yet in wartime they were the best, but in peacetime they're almost a nuisance to society in a way that it kind of makes you wonder, that whether they're really made for modern civilization or something else. Every man born a little different. And if you know anything about Kermit, he throughout his whole life, like the Roosevelt family in general, actually, they struggled with
melancholy
and manic behavior and depression, and Roosevelt did too. Theodore Roosevelt did too, and we talked about this. He sort of tackled it though through nature and the outdoors and
exercise.
It gave him it was his it was what kept him sort of sane, and Theodore also didn't quite go through the same depths of depression like his son and I think his father, and I don't recall all the parts of the family, but Kermit struggles, later in life, and man, he's just such a remarkable young man with so much potential, but also at the same time struggling with all these demons and how to live live life. But on this experience on the River of Doubt, you really see the courage and the nobility that Kermit had inside of him, After 12 days on the river, the expedition had only managed to cover 75 miles, an average of less than 7 miles a day. So you start to panic, right? Because you only have so much food. You only have so much. And every day it's taking not only just the calories and the effort. And what if it's like this the whole way to the ocean?
Which they still have no idea how far it is.
Yeah. Okay, so continuing, it says, exhausted and hungry, the men decided to make camp immediately directly below the last rapid. So they get past it, and they're like, okay, we're not even going to float out. We're done moving the boats. We're going to take a break. As usual, they searched for a high, level stretch of ground and then moored their canoes to some trees at the river's edge. Perhaps Fiala's stories of losing his provisions to the icy waters of the Arctic had stayed with them, because that night, as beaten by the river and jungle as they were, they hauled their provisions out of the canoes and up the slippery, overgrown bank. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than a mild precaution. Now, Fiala is the one who sort of helped organize this expedition. And why they hired Fiala is still a mystery, because he was pretty much the most famous
failed explorer.
He organized that Arctic expedition as well, where he survives. He has like 9 lives, but only by sheer accident. Like he is the worst planner, and I think he just bumped into the gentleman who kind of was the Catholic guy.
Mm-hmm.
They
Father,
just kind of, Father, what's his name? And they bumped into each other at Abercrombie and Fitch, and Fiala was a failed explorer who is now a salesman, and then he planned this expedition. Anyway, it was not the best way to go. So anyway, for whatever reason, they pulled the provisions out of the canoes as they tied them up at the bottom of the rapids to take a break. They often left it in the canoes, but today they didn't. As the men slept that night in their hammocks, the camaradas beneath 12-foot-long wild banana tree leaves that gave them some meager shelter from the rain, the river rose. Slowly, inch by inch, water began to seep into the old and leaky dugout that had been tied to the expedition's largest canoe. At some point during the night, the leaky dugout took on so much water that it began to sink, dragging the big canoe down with it. Since the men had chosen a campsite close to the tail of the rapids, the river was not only high, it was rough, and the 2 boats rolled and twisted in the current until they finally snapped their moorings and were swept downriver. The members of the expedition had endured a week of painful portages because they could not imagine even losing 1 canoe. Now they had lost 2. When they discovered their loss the next morning, the men, hoping against hope that they would recover at least one of the dugouts, immediately mounted a search party. However, the same sharp boulders that had torn open the face of one of their paddlers had made quick work of the old waterlogged dugouts. Rolling over the boulders on the rocky bottom, they had once been riven asunder. Roosevelt wrote. And the big fragments that were soon found floating in eddies or along the shore showed that it was useless to look farther.
That blows.
Sometimes I have a hard time reading Roosevelt's actual writings because nobody talks like that.
I don't even know what riven means.
We're so uneducated. The men had saved their provisions from the same fate by hauling them up to the camp the night before, but with only 5 canoes left, they could no longer carry all of their food. And equipment, not to mention their men down the river.
That's why you always bring extra axle spokes, Brian, and extra wagon wheels.
Now, not only could the members of the expedition not turn back, but they could not move forward. They were stranded on the tree-shrouded banks of the River of Doubt. All right, Brent, what do you think?
They're SOL, yeah.
What do you think they're going to do next? What would you do?
I'm going to assume, either get to ditch half the party and say, see ya. Got to ditch a bunch of their stuff, or they got to make another canoe. But I don't know if they got the right kind of trees around. And I don't want to screw around with any of the trees down there. They basically have armies of insects protecting them.
When are they going to go all Lord of the Flies and start eating people and stuff?
I hope not.
All right, back to the book. Standing at the river's edge, Roosevelt and his men realized that they had very few options left. They could either try to hack their way through the forest on foot, likely losing most, if not all, of their men in the process, or they could try to build a new canoe.
There we go.
The last option was nearly as dangerous as the first.
Really?
That means time and the eating into our limited supply of provisions, Cherry scrawled, frustrated in his diary. So Cherry is the expedition's naturalist. Worked at the museum, has spent a lot of time outdoors, is just an awesome guy, kind of a survivalist as well.
He goes out and collects animals for the museum, basically.
Yeah, he's done some. He fits right in with this crew, and he knows nature and all that. He knew as well as Roosevelt and Rondon that the expedition could ill afford a delay of even a few days. In an effort to find out just how dire their circumstances had become, the expedition's officers gathered together to take stock of their rations. When splitting the provisions with Miller and Amilcar before they launched their boats, the River of Doubt party had taken 50 of the 90 food tins that Fiala had packed, as well as the 75 United States Army emergency rations he had purchased as a precaution. Each tin box was meant to hold enough food for 5 men for one day. Concerned that the former president had not just gourmet condiments, but also a variety of foods during what was supposed to be an uneventful journey, Fiala, the failed explorer, had planned 7 different meals, one for each day of the week, and had numbered each box from 1 to 7. So number 1 would be Monday.
My guess here is that all they have are 7s left, and it's like just tacos.
It's worse than that. So he numbered them so that Roosevelt could never have to have the same meal twice in a row. The Friday meal, for example, consisted of rice, bread, ginger snaps, dehydrated potatoes, and onions. A type of sausage, condensed milk, bacon curry, and chicken, dates, sugar, coffee, tea, and salt. I just cringe thinking about how much weight that is.
That's
if you
heavy.
have a boat,
that's not like a little bit.
That's not backpacking food.
They do have dehydrated potatoes.
The Saturday meal was similar, but Fiala had made some strategic changes, such as replacing rice with oatmeal and potatoes with baked beans. Each tin, which had been lacquered to protect it from rust, also held a yard of muslin, 2 boxes of matches, and a single cake of soap. What is that, Brent? Muslin? Muslin?
I want to say type of gauze. Muslin? Muslin?
Well,
this is why we need the freaking internet.
Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
We're lost without it. It's like it's an extension of our brain. What the officers discovered when they took stock of these provisions now, however, alarmed even Cherry, the naturalist. There were sufficient rations for the men to last about 35 days, he wrote, while the rations that had been arranged for the officials of the party would perhaps last 50 days.
So they had different tins for the head honchos.
For the workers versus
the
versus,
the quality of the classes. I get it.
So 35 days for the men, and then for Theodore and Kermit and Rondon and stuff, they had 55 days of food, or 50 days of food. With grim certainty, the officers calculated that if the expedition continued to advance at this slow rate, they would be without food of any kind beyond what they could catch or forage for the last month of their journey.
And that's a guesstimation. They don't really know.
As well as worrying about their quickly dwindling rations, the men were reluctant to stay in one spot for too long for another reason. They were not alone. The jungle was, they now knew, inhabited by a group of Indians that had no contact with the outside world. Rondon believed that the expedition was probably traveling through Nhambiquara territory, but that was just a hunch. He could not be any more certain of what tribe of Indians they might face than he was of where the river was taking them. No other non-native had ever been down the River of Doubt, and even the Nhambiquara, who lived near its headwaters, had not been able to tell Rondon what he might expect from the Indians who lived on its banks. Although the members of the expedition had yet to see a single human being human being since they had launched their boats nearly 2 weeks earlier.
Good Lord. It's only been 2 weeks, Brian.
They've
only been out for 2 weeks.
They had seen several signs of human life.
Now, when they say human signs, they mean like an actual sign or like a skull on a stick?
We'll see. Not only had they passed an abandoned village in the remains of a broken bridge, but while crossing an Indian trail, Kermit had stumbled upon a pataran, an arrangement of branches and leaves designed to convey a message. What concerned the men about the pataran was that, unlike the rotting huts and overgrown fields, it was not a remnant of a deserted village. It had clearly been constructed very recently, and as Roosevelt wrote, it had some special significance. It might have been simply an Indian path marker giving directions to a camp or a prime fishing spot, but it just as easily might have been a warning to the members of the expedition. Either way, they were not willing to take any chances. No one of us ever went 10 yards from the camp without his rifle, Roosevelt wrote.
I bet you the Pataran said, F around, find out.
Dude, don't you think, like, they're, like, looking over their shoulder left and, like, you're a sitting duck if these native people, and we read earlier in the book about some of the brutal ways that the Indians had just gone in and just murdered people. And
you can only see like 10 feet in the bush.
It also went both ways. Like the retaliation against the native people was brutal from the Brazilians as well. So, but yeah, I'm much more worried. Like Anthony told me one day, we flew into Ketchikan, Alaska on our way to Prince of Wales Island, and we stopped at one of the hotels there. And we were getting ready to leave to go out to dinner. And Anthony grabbed his like 10 millimeter that he would normally, take, as bear protection, and he's strapping it to himself. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, He's like, "I'm not worried about the bears." He's like, "I'm not worried about four-legged predators, Brian. I'm worried about two-legged predators."
Amen.
And I mean, that hit me like, "Oh, you're totally right." Like, I'm much more worried about what a human does to another human than I am animals. Mm-hmm. You look at stories like Daniel Boone or Kit Carson, some of these early folks that would venture into out west, and explore and trap. Their risk was very rarely the grizzly, the mountain lion, nature itself necessarily, even though the weather. Their biggest risk was another two-legged human being coming along and murdering them, or torturing them, or doing whatever they do to them, right? So that had to be on their mind constantly. And it had to make them be like, let's get out of here.
Amen.
Having spent the past week fighting their way through a relentless series of rapids, the men would have little opportunity to rest during their forced delay. Construction of the new dugout had to begin immediately as the rain fell, soaking everything and everyone. The camaradas trudged through the jungle, fanning out in different directions in an intensive search for trees that would be suitable for canoe. They finally found 3 that they thought might work, chopped them down, and dragged them back to camp. Roosevelt judged them all to be splendid-looking trees, but Rondon decided to use only one of them. It was a species of, say that word, Brent. Euphorbiaceae. Whatever. A para-rubber tree.
Oh, gee. Why did they do
which can grow to be 120 feet tall in its natural habitat.
What's her face got a little pretentious there. She could have just said a para-rubber tree.
This one was 5 feet in diameter, and its timber, which was the Brazilians called tatajuba, was yellowish in color. Under Rondon's direction, the camaradas fell to work. They only had time to build one canoe to replace the 2 that had been lost, so if it had any hope of carrying the expedition's cargo, it had to be big. The men measured off 26 feet from the tree's base and then began the back-breaking work of hewing it out. Typically, in building a dugout canoe, an axe is used to cut a flat plank from the bark and hollow out the trunk until the interior space is a couple of feet deep. The canoe is then filled with leaves, turned upside down, so that a small fire can be lit inside to help waterproof it and smooth it out its rough edges. Next, the builders flip the canoe back over. Canoe's a strong word here. Mm-hmm. Flip the log back over, the hewn log back over, and while the wood is still warm, scrape the interior walls and floor with the curved blade of an adze. Finally, they placed cross pieces from wall to wall in the interior to help stretch the canoe. The members of the expedition allowed themselves only 4 days to complete the canoe. They worked in shifts, and Rondon never left their side, tirelessly directing the construction and ensuring that every man pulled his weight. The toll on the camaradas was heavy. Their backs ached, their arms quivered with fatigue, and under constant attack from the insects, their hands, faces, and feet became raw and inflamed. Under Rondon's unwavering gaze, however, they never let up and never slowed down. Even after the sunset, Roosevelt watched the camaradas toil by candlelight, stripped to the waist in the hot, still air, some standing inside the canoe, others bent over its thick hull. The flicker of the lights showed the tropic forest rising in the darkness round about. He wrote, "Olive and copper and ebony, their skins glistened as if oiled, and rippled with the ceaseless play of the thews beneath." See, there goes Roosevelt again, using these big fancy Harvard words. Since witnessing their heroic struggle to bring the expedition's dugout canoes through the rapids, Roosevelt had developed a deep admiration for his team of camaradas. Looking at the way the work was done, and at the goodwill, the endurance, and the bull-like strength of the camaradas, and at the intelligence and the unwearied efforts of their commanders, he wrote, "One could not but wonder at the ignorance of those who did not realize the energy and the power that are so often possessed by, and that may be so readily developed in, the men of the tropics." Only one camarada had turned out to be, in Roosevelt's word, utterly worthless. Julio de Lima had proved himself to be so lazy and untrustworthy that if Rondon could have sent him back, he would have. When we were able to discover his bad qualities, his cowardice, and complete incapacity to follow up the continuous efforts of his fellow companions, we were so far advanced in the river that it was impossible for us to rid ourselves of his presence, Rondon wrote.
I'm pretty sure they could have got rid of his presence, just tip him out the boat.
When they were hiring camaradas in Tapirapoan, Julio had caught their eye because of his strapping physique and good health and professed enthusiasm for the work.
So he's some Chad that tricked him.
The enthusiasm, however, had evaporated as soon as they reached their first set of rapids, and his strength was useless to them because he would never use it for the good of the expedition unless threatened with punishment or even abandonment. He's weak. He's a weak man. He's got all the physical gifts that a man has, but not the character to go with it. In the expedition, no one relied upon the assistance of his strength, and least of all, of his will, Rondon wrote. Roosevelt had absolutely no use for Julio, calling him an inborn lazy shirk with the heart of a ferocious cur and the body of a bullock.
Inborn? Does he mean like inbred?
Yes.
Inbred,
calling
lazy.
him an inborn lazy shirk with the heart of a ferocious cur, which is a mutt dog, in the body of a bullock. But Rondon was determined to make him work. Rondon did not tolerate laziness or disobedience from anyone in his regiment. When it came to his soldiers, he had earned a reputation for being implacable. In the wilderness, where his men had to fight daily just to survive, he had no alternative but to guide his regiment with a firm hand. He had, however, learned through painful personal experience the importance of tempering the anger that flared inside of him at the first sign of rebellion. 20 years earlier, Rondon had ordered a group of men who had rebelled against his officers to be flogged with bamboo sticks for more than an hour. Such punishment was against the law in Brazil at the time, but it was widely known to be common practice in Mato Grosso. This time, however, it had disastrous results. Under the force of a blow, a bamboo stick had snapped and punctured the lung of one of the soldiers.
Ooh.
Horrified, Rondon had quickly ordered an end to the flogging, but there had been nothing that he could do for the wounded man, who eventually died from peritonitis. Peritonitis.
Which is stabbing?
It sounds bad. Some kind of infection, bacterial, it sounds
you don't
like.
want any of those itises. They're not good.
Yeah. Although Rondon deeply regretted the man's death and vowed never again to resort to violence, he did not and could not dispense with all forms of punishment.
Hold up. Vowed never again to resort to violence. Yeah, buddy. Sure. Sure.
Nor did he rely on the weight of the Brazilian military to enforce his rules to keep his men in check. Even within his thin 5'3" frame, he could intimidate the most unruly mob of young men. 6 years earlier, while at work extending the telegraph line, Rondon soldiers had wreaked havoc on a small town, reeling drunkenly in the streets, breaking windows, and starting fights. After receiving only a lackluster response to his order to leave the saloons and assemble before him in the street, Rondon had turned toward the largest tavern in town, dug his spurs into his horse's sides, and charged at full speed through the front doors. As men scrambled to get out of the way, he vaulted a table and bounded out the back door. One of his officers then solemnly announced that Rondon would smash every bottle in town if the saloons did not close. Moments later, the soldier staggered into the streets, swept along by anxious barkeepers.
Oh, it's a little less violent.
There's a little flair.
Little less.
Yeah.
He could have trampled someone to death with a horse.
He's got some style, though. He's ticked off. While Rondon and his comrades built a new canoe for the expedition, Roosevelt and his son did their best to find food in the eerily quiet forest.
What would you rather do? Chop the tree up and make a log, or would you want to go hunting in the Amazon?
Somebody's got to.
I know you want to hunt in the Amazon.
Somebody's got to do the hunting. Although, hewing a log has its joy in labor,
No.
building.
I'd
I'm
go
all about hunting.
Hunting/guard duty, so I just hang around the perimeter with a gun.
Kermit shot an 8-foot-long water snake.
All right.
8 feet, dude. I wonder how fat it was. So he shoots an 8-foot-long water snake and a curassow. That's that bird again, right?
Mm-hmm.
A large crested game bird. And he just missed several red howler monkeys, which were frightened away by Rondon's favorite dog, Lobo.
Which just means wolf.
Yeah. How do you say lone wolf in Spanish?
Solo lobo?
Yeah, that's right. I think so. All right.
Again, we're not sure. Don't quote us.
Roosevelt, on the other hand, unfailingly returned to camp empty-handed. I spent the day hunting in the woods, for the most part by the river, he wrote of one such solo hunting trip, but saw nothing. Few among them would have been surprised by the revelation. Not only were the animals of the rainforest masters of disguise, but Roosevelt, the mighty hunter, was famously myopic. He was always alone on these excursions, Rondon would later recall, and most frequently he returned without any game whatever. As being short-sighted, he did not always succeed in seeing the game from afar, and the latter, in its turn, was scared and fled when it heard the footsteps as he approached it. Remember when he was like 12, the spectacles?
Yeah, the Coke bottle lenses.
Yeah, and he couldn't see. He was blind as a bat, and he didn't know he was blind. He just realized, and then he got his first set of spectacles when he was like 12, and he was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out there.
Yeah, I remember when I found out I couldn't see things far away, I was pissed.
Yeah.
I was like, that's BS. And I remember getting glasses and being like, you spoiled sons of bitches. This is how you see all the time.
Right.
I relate.
So Roosevelt's myopia had hampered his hunting and bird watching ever since he was a small child.
Which is why he's a big game hunter.
Yeah, quite unknown to myself, I was, while a boy, under a hopeless disadvantage in studying nature, he explained in his autobiography. I was very nearsighted, so that the only things I could study were those I ran against or stumbled over. Roosevelt got his first gun and his first pair of glasses at about the same time.
That's good. That's a good combo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here's your eyeballs and here's your shooter.
Unfortunately, the gun came first.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, of course. That's probably when his dad was like, oh, shoot.
His dad was like, we have a problem here. Houston, we have a problem. Roosevelt could not understand why his friends were consistently spotting and shooting game that he could not even see. It was not until he confessed his difficulties to his father that his myopia was finally diagnosed, and he was fitted with a strong pair of lenses. Those glasses, he wrote, literally opened an entirely new world to me. I had no idea how beautiful the world was until I got those spectacles.
Makes you appreciate things.
Yeah. That's bad.
8 or 10.
Roosevelt prized his spectacles. He carried 8 or 10 pairs with him, carefully distributed throughout his luggage whenever he traveled.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that.
In the tropics, however, his nearsightedness proved to be a greater disadvantage than it had been elsewhere. Not only did his glasses constantly fog in the heavy humidity, it was almost impossible for him to see when it rained, which it did several times a day. While this frustrating and potentially dangerous disability would have kept most men out of the rainforest, Roosevelt refused even to acknowledge that it was a problem. It was a continual source of amazement to see how skillfully Father had discounted. Let me say this again. It was a continual source of amazement to see how skillfully Father had discounted this handicap in advance and appeared to be unhampered by it, Kermit wrote.
He reminds me of those guys that have no legs that climb mountains. Like, this is fine. This is fine.
I do remember when I read his biography where he was talking about how he was so good at picking up bird sounds. You know, when you have bad eyes, you tend to get better senses.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've watched Daredevil. I know how it works.
And he was so interested in, really being able to, find birds. And so he would hear the sound and then go from there. On March 13, the Camaradas worked until nearly midnight, and the next morning, in the middle of a torrential downpour, they finally completed the canoe. It took all 22 men to drag the 26-foot dugout down the mud-slick bank. You're going to use a leg or a foot or something with that log.
Or your everything. That thing will just slide right over you.
But by early afternoon, it had begun its maiden voyage on the River of Doubt. The men were proud of their new, although hastily built dugout, and they were thrilled to be moving again. But the river gave them little opportunity to celebrate, Brent.
You think they named their canoes?
Probably.
Do you think they gave them crappy names like Lobo?
Solo Lobo.
Solo Lobo.
The farther the canoes traveled downstream, the faster the current became, steadily picking up speed as it cut its way down the northern face of the highlands. Worse, large shifting whirlpools trailed their dugouts like sharks circling a lifeboat. It was a measure of how desperate the men had become that on their first day back on the river, they decided to run every set of rapids they encountered. I've been there, dude. I've been there. When Lampers and I are...
We can do it. We can do it.
We're backpacked in on our little alpaca rafts. Mm-hmm. It's sub 5 pounds. This thing is tiny. It's like a little cork floating in like, a class 5 rapid. And we're like, especially me.
The classes. Like, what's the one where you say no?
I don't know.
You say class 5, you're talking astrology at this point.
You're talking, you're going to die.
Okay.
So
a 1, a 2, a 3, those are cool. 4, you're iffy. 5 is a no-go?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we're guessing, folks.
I think Ben fell out of the raft and almost drowned, and I got the life-saving hero award from the Boy Scouts of America.
That's what it's called, the hero award.
Yeah. I just throw it out there. I did save Ben's life, cousin Ben's life. It was a touch-and-go situation. I risked my life. And
I think at this point, he just would have drowned. He's probably heard the story so many times.
I only bring it up because it's relevant to the story we're saying today. I'm loath to mention it again, but I saved him.
Saved his life.
Yeah.
Because he can't swim,
and so he fell out. I think it wasn't Box Springs. It was on the Deschutes River. I think it was the Oak Springs, the vortex, and he fell, right in and spashed his head. And I don't remember, like some 20 stitches or something on the back of his head.
I was like
maybe
2.
10. I don't know.
Help you.
Yeah, blood everywhere. When you fall in a river like that and on a rapid like that, I mean, you can get sucked in and you're done.
Yeah, I had a friend growing up, fell out. She had a life vest on, sucked underwater, got stuck on a rock.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Suzanne, you mentioned the friend, and Suzanne was the young women's leader at that time at church and on the trip and stuff. So it happens fast. Rapids are nothing to mess around with. And so Ryan and I are rafting these rivers, and after you've got out and portaged your raft, like you pull all your gear out of the baffles, you deflate your raft, you load it into a backpack, you walk
your 4-pound raft, not your 400-pound canoe.
Right, but still, I mean, you got to load your pack up, and it's 130 pounds with meat and everything, and you hike a mile, and then you get out and you blow it up, and you float another 5 miles, right, and then you get out and you hike just a quarter mile around the rapids, but every time you break down the raft and blow it back up, it's just a pain.
Look, if that story would have been really sad if we hadn't been reading this before, there would have been a lot more sympathy for you. But after this, it's kind of like, and you're complaining.
But the thing is, I've been in the same situations where I'm like, we can do this. Like, let's just shoot this rapid. We're going to be fine.
If we just hug the left side, we'll be fine.
We'll be fine. And Ryan and I have done some where we're like, that was a little sketchy. Maybe that wasn't the best decision. And there's been a couple times where I'm like, let's do it. And Ryan's like, yeah, I'm taking your
veto.
I'm taking your vote out of this. We're not doing that. So, what is it without a little danger, though? You know, it's all about the adventure,
survival.
Yeah. So anyway, so they decide, Brent, they're going to shoot the rapids, even though better judgment.
We felt it was necessary to risk the running rapids.
Yeah, I'm going to read this. They could not predict how their new canoe would hold up in the writhing river, and all their dugouts were piled so high with heavy equipment and men that, in spite of the branches lashed to the sides, they sank to within 3 inches of the water's surface. So they tried to make the boats more, buoyant by adding like sticks and stuff and to the sides, but the river's myriad dangers paled in comparison with the threat of starving to death in the rainforest. So they were like, man, we just got to get going. We're just taking too much time.
Starving to death's not how I want to go. I'd rather drown.
So, of the two hazards, Roosevelt wrote, we felt it necessary to risk running the rapids. Now, hindsight's 20/20. It's a tough call, but I think that was the wrong decision. So strong was their sense of urgency that Rondon was persuaded to abandon the fixed station survey and resort to a faster, although less accurate method of mapping the river. So what he had been doing is he's been trying to build a map of the river so they can chart it, show where the rapids are, kind of, so they can then give this to the next set of explorers that go.
Didn't they have like sticks and they were measuring things?
Yeah, and so he has a real accurate way of doing it, and he's like, screw that. We're going to go to
We're just going to freehand this little section right here.
Instead of waiting for Kermit to land, cut away the vines on the bank, and plant the sighting rod, Rondon and Lyra had to make their measurements based on sightings of the lead canoe as it raced down the river. So just in motion. Not only was this method less dependable, it placed Kermit and his paddlers in even greater danger. They were now obliged to keep Rondon and Lyra in their sights, as well as keep a sharp eye out for rapids and whirlpools. Within the course of just 4 hours that day, the men would run 6 sets of rapids, but while Kermit in his small canoe safely skimmed past every whirlpool he encountered, his father's large lumbering dugout was not as agile or as fortunate. While running one set of big ripples, as Roosevelt described it, his canoe was suddenly caught in the powerful suctioning grip of a vortex. The dugout began to fill with water so fast that Cherry and Dr. Kajazira were forced to leap overboard to lighten the load. With strong, swift strokes, the camaradas fought their way out of the whirlpool, but the canoe had come perilously close to being swamped and all of its cargo and perhaps even its men lost. That night, as they made camp in the darkened forest, the men felt a deep sense of satisfaction and even relief. In just half a day on the river, they had managed to make nearly 10 miles of crucial progress. But while their daring had paid off that day, they knew the odds of repeating this success were slim. The more chances they took, the more likely they were to lose everything. We had already met with misfortune, Cherry would later write, but the following day was to be one of tragedy.
Oh, man, a built-in cliffhanger.
Yep. The next podcast, we're going to cover death in the rapids,
and we're going to finish this book. We're committed. We're going to finish this book.
We're not going to leave you all stranded in the Amazon. We're going to do our best. Anyway,
not our best. We're going to finish.
We're going to do this. Brent is committed because basically I can't do it without Brent. Are you in, Brent? Because
do it,
folks. If it doesn't happen, we blame Brent.
We
all blame Brent.
Fine. I'll be the bigger man. I'll take that hit.
Anyway, that's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast. If you like what we're doing, you like our show, support us. look at the description field below. There's a whole bunch of coupon codes and discount affiliate codes that we have with partners that support our show. And every time you buy from them, it helps us do the show.
Yeah.
And it's been great. So there's some great deals down there. Check out Stealthy Nutrition. If you need some supplements like CBD oil for your aching joints, check out the gut health products that Stealthy Nutrition has. I really like the krill oil. I like the sleep aid stuff. I like, the probiotic, the gut health. It's all good. So check that out. And then
I've just eaten a lot of the gummies.
They're awesome. And if you don't have a Stealthy Hunter rifle cover or glassing pad, you need one. They're awesome. Check that out. And then finally, use the code GRITTY at Initial Ascent Backpacks. I love my pack. I've used everything on the market. I don't have it here.
I'm looking around. Like it lies around. It kind of gets
somewhere.
up and moves on its own.
I think it's the best frame design for carrying heavy loads. And I carry heavy loads, so it's become my favorite pack that's out there. So can't recommend the Initial Ascent backpack enough. Use the code GRITTY and you save over there, and it helps us. Check it out. Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty.